All right, so you wanted more about duels of honor?
Yeah.
And honestly, so did I.
Me too.
Turns out there's a lot of misconceptions about what they were.
Yeah.
Today we're diving into an academic paper,
Okay.
The Duel of Honor, a demonstration of competences of honor or barratry,
Oh, wow.
by Marcin Bijewski.
Interesting.
To unpack this fascinating ritual.
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much, we think we know about dueling,
Right.
but then we get it wrong.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this paper really shines a light on
Yeah.
the complexity and the nuance that gets lost
Yeah.
in, the romanticized version that we usually hear about.
Yeah, we picture swashbuckling sword fights.
Right.
Maybe some dramatic music.
Of course.
But the reality was a lot more intricate.
Yeah.
And, dare I say, thought-provoking.
Absolutely.
To kick things off, what really surprised you when you dug into this research?
Well, one thing that really jumped out at me was the concept of the American duel.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine two pistols, one loaded, one not. And the duelists draw lots to see who gets the live weapon.
Okay.
Now that
sounds kind of scary.
it was not considered an honor duel.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Why not? It sounds pretty dramatic.
It was definitely risky.
And risky to me.
But remember, honor duels weren't about risking death for the sake of it. They were
No.
about demonstrating honor in a
Okay.
very specific way.
Right.
The element of pure chance in the American duel took away from that.
So instead of a duel to the death,
Yeah.
it sounds like these duels of honor were more about demonstrating something, making a point.
Exactly.
Okay.
The paper calls it a demonstration of competences of honor,
Right.
which sounds a bit academic,
Yeah.
but it basically means showcasing your character,
Yeah.
your commitment to a code of conduct.
Okay.
And that brings us to what made a duel honorable.
Okay.
There were 4 main conditions that had to be met.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, both participants had to have honorability.
I remember this from the paper.
Yeah.
I'm still a bit fuzzy on what it means. It sounds a bit like a dueling license or something.
It sort of was.
Okay.
It meant belonging to the right social class,
Uh-huh.
the gentlemen, as they were called,
Right.
and even more importantly, adhering to their specific code of conduct.
Okay.
Basically, you had to have earned the right to
Yes.
participate in this very formalized ritual.
Okay, so that's one condition.
Uh-huh.
What were the other 3?
Second, there had to be equal fighting ground.
Good.
No one could have an unfair advantage because of the terrain.
Right.
Third, they needed equal weapons.
Of course.
No sneaking in a bigger sword.
Right.
And finally, there had to be a relatively equal skill level.
So it wasn't like a seasoned swordsman could just challenge anyone and
Exactly.
expect to win based on skill alone.
Unless both participants were masters,
Okay.
it was expected that their swordsmanship would be relatively equal.
Got it.
Remember, it was about showcasing honor, not
Okay.
simply overpowering someone.
This is starting to paint a very different picture
Yeah.
than the wild free-for-alls we usually imagine.
Right.
And speaking of surprising details,
Yes.
the paper also mentions some specific rules
Uh-huh.
that seem, well, almost counterintuitive for a duel.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the fact that the swords had to be perfectly polished
Yes.
and free of rust.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
You'd think that when you're about to have a sword fight, a little rust wouldn't be top of mind.
Right.
But the code was very clear on this point.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about aesthetics.
Okay.
A rusty sword was more likely to cause a jagged wound, leading to
Right.
infection and potentially death,
Right.
which, as we've established, was not the primary goal here.
So in a way, even amidst the possibility of violence, there's a real emphasis on safety and minimizing risk.
Yeah.
I also found it interesting that a doctor was required to be present at every duel.
Yeah.
It almost feels like they were taking precautions like it was a sporting event,
I had the same thought.
not a fight to the death.
It really underscores the fact that duels of honor were bound by a strict set of rules and procedures.
Yeah,
And these duels weren't spontaneous outbursts of anger either.
you're right. They were the culmination of a whole process
Yeah.
called honor proceedings.
Exactly.
What can you tell us about that?
Well, imagine this whole system of honor proceedings as a very structured dance
Okay.
with very specific steps
Okay.
outlined in detailed honor codes.
Got it.
Think of it like legal documents for
Mhm.
settling disputes,
Right.
but with potentially deadly consequences.
Yeah.
The duel itself was just the final act,
Hmm.
the climax of this whole drama.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah,
A drama with very high stakes indeed.
absolutely.
And all of these details really start to challenge the image
Yeah.
of a duel as just a barbaric, violent act.
For sure.
There was so much more to it than that.
Absolutely.
So if the duel was the final act,
Right.
what were the earlier stages like? How did this whole process unfold?
Well, the paper goes into detail about the role of seconds.
Okay.
These were trusted representatives
Uh-huh.
chosen by each duelist,
Right.
and they had a ton of responsibility throughout the whole process.
Okay, so it wasn't like you just grabbed your buddy and
Yeah.
said, hey, want to be my second in a duel?
Not at all.
Okay.
The seconds had to be gentlemen themselves, meaning they had to uphold that same code of honor.
Got it.
They negotiated the terms of the duel,
Uh-huh.
made sure everything was done by the book.
Okay.
And importantly, they tried to mediate a resolution
Oh.
before things escalated to the actual duel.
So there was a real effort to settle things peacefully
Absolutely.
before resorting to violence.
Remember, the goal was to restore honor,
Right.
not necessarily to inflict harm.
Okay.
In fact, the paper argues that a sincere apology,
Uh-huh.
one that truly acknowledged the offense and offered amends,
Yeah.
could often prevent the duel from happening altogether.
So even in this world of formal duels, there was still room for reconciliation.
Yes.
It wasn't just about stubborn pride or
Yeah.
refusing to back down.
Right. It was about navigating a complex social system
Yeah.
where honor was paramount.
Okay.
And that actually brings us to another surprising aspect of dueling
Okay.
that the paper highlights.
Right.
It might sound counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
the duel was also seen as a demonstration of respect.
Wait, hold on, respect.
I know it seems strange,
We're talking about a potentially deadly sword fight here.
but think about it.
Okay.
By agreeing to duel under these very specific honorable conditions,
Oh.
you were essentially recognizing your opponent as your equal.
Oh.
You were saying, I respect your right to uphold your principles,
Right.
even though I disagree with them.
So by risking your life, you were also acknowledging the other person's right to stand by their convictions.
Precisely.
Wow, that's a really different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about winning or losing,
Right.
but about recognizing each other's commitment to a shared code of honor.
Exactly. And this act of recognition,
Yeah.
even in the face of conflict,
Uh-huh.
is what, according to the author, elevates the duel from mere violence
Okay.
to a ritual with deeper social and ethical implications.
Interesting.
The duel was meant to be the final word, the
Ooh.
end of the dispute.
Oh.
No rematches, no holding grudges.
So it was like drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah.
The duel was a way of saying, we've addressed this, we've both stood our ground, and now we move forward.
Right.
Almost like a reset button for the relationship.
Exactly. It was about closure
Uh,
and ultimately about finding a way back to a state of mutual respect,
yeah.
even after a serious disagreement.
Okay, but this all raises a pretty big question.
Yeah.
Who were these gentlemen
Yeah.
who engaged in these duels of honor?
Right.
They weren't just random hotheads picking fights, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
The paper defines them as a specific social class,
Yep.
the elite of their time.
Right.
They were supposed to be the embodiment of ethical behavior, polite, trustworthy, honorable.
Right.
It makes it even more intriguing that they would resort to such a formalized ritual combat.
Yeah.
What drove them to such extremes?
Yeah. What was the psychology behind this?
Well,
Were these duels always about serious offenses?
theoretically, any perceived slight to one's honor could be grounds for a challenge.
Really?
The paper mentions how an honor offense was untimely in the eyes of the offended.
So it was pretty subjective.
It was.
But surely there were some limits.
Right. Of course,
Right.
the honor codes discouraged frivolous duels.
Right,
Remember, this whole system was about maintaining a certain standard of conduct.
Right.
They even frowned upon first blood duels,
Okay.
where the fight ended as soon as someone was scratched.
Why would they discourage that?
Yeah.
It seems less risky.
It was seen as too much like a game,
Oh,
trivializing the whole concept of honor.
got it.
It was about something deeper than just a superficial wound.
Okay, so this wasn't just about ego or
Yeah.
proving who was tougher. It was about something much more ingrained in their social fabric.
Exactly. And speaking of social fabric,
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about how this system of dueling,
Yeah.
with all its ritualistic elements,
Right?
connects to broader ideas of justice and social order.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What's the connection there?
Well, the paper brings up the concept of procedural justice,
Okay.
which is basically the idea that the process by which a dispute is resolved matters just as much as the outcome.
So in a duel, it's not just about who wins or loses,
Right.
but whether the whole thing was conducted fairly according to the rules.
Yes, and the paper argues that even in a disagreement as serious as one that leads to a duel,
Okay.
recognizing the other person's right to their principles was a key element of that fairness.
So even though you're literally felling this person,
Yeah.
you're also acknowledging their right to hold their beliefs.
Right.
You're saying, we may disagree, but we're both bound by a higher code of conduct.
Right. And the fact that these gentlemen were willing to risk their lives to uphold this code
Yeah.
says a lot about how important it was to them.
It's like those values were the foundation of their society, and the duel was a way of reaffirming them,
Yeah,
even when those values led to conflict.
precisely. Which begs the question,
Okay.
what can we learn from this today? Even though dueling is obviously a thing of the past,
Yeah.
we're not going to start challenging people to duels over Twitter arguments.
Right.
So what's the takeaway here for us in the 21st century?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway is the importance of recognizing the humanity of those we disagree with.
Right.
You know, it's so easy to get caught up in the heat of an argument and forget that there's a person on the other side
Yeah.
with their own experiences and perspectives.
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of the duel, with all its formality and ritual, really drives that home.
Right.
These gentlemen,
Yeah.
even when they were about to engage in potentially deadly combat,
Right.
were still acknowledging each other's right to their beliefs.
It's almost like they were saying, we may be about to cross swords, but I still see you as someone worthy of respect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while we don't need to go to such extremes today,
Right.
I think that underlying principle of recognizing the other, even in disagreement,
Yeah.
is something we could all benefit from remembering.
It's like finding a way to duel with words and ideas
That's a fantastic way to put it.
rather than with swords.
And that's the beauty of reasoned discourse.
Right.
It allows us to engage in those duels of ideas,
Ah.
to challenge each other's beliefs,
Right.
to refine our own thinking without resorting to violence or hatred.
But in today's world with social media and the 24-hour news cycle,
I know.
it seems like reasoned discourse is in short supply.
It's definitely a challenge. But that's why I think this research is so relevant.
Right.
It reminds us that even in a historical context, that seems so different from our own, there was still this emphasis on respecting the process,
Right.
on engaging in a certain way,
Yeah.
even when disagreements were deep and personal.
And the paper also points out
Yeah.
that those honor codes,
Mm-hmm.
those rules of dueling,
Right.
weren't just about individual disputes.
Exactly.
They actually helped to shape social norms and expectations
Yeah.
within that gentlemanly class.
Yes. And that's a fascinating aspect of this whole system.
Right.
It wasn't just about winning a particular fight,
Yeah.
but about maintaining a certain standard of conduct,
Right.
a way of being in the world
Yeah.
that reflected those values of honor and integrity.
So by adhering to these codes, by conducting themselves honorably,
Yeah.
these gentlemen were essentially upholding the
Yeah.
very foundations of their society.
Precisely, it was a self-regulating system, one that relied on a shared understanding
Okay.
of what it meant to be honorable
Uh-huh.
and a willingness to defend those principles even at great personal risk.
It's a shame that dueling isn't around anymore. I'm kidding, of course.
Right.
But it does make you wonder
Yeah.
how much of that spirit of recognition, of respectful disagreement,
Right.
have we lost in today's world?
It's definitely something to ponder.
It is.
And maybe by looking back at these historical examples, but we can find ways to foster those values in our own time.
Right.
It's not about bringing back duels, obviously, but about rediscovering that commitment to principled disagreement,
Yeah.
to engaging with each other in a way that upholds our shared humanity.
This whole deep dive has really given me a new perspective on dueling.
Good.
It's not just about the sword fights and the drama.
Right.
It's about these deeper principles
Yeah.
that were woven into the fabric of their society.
I think that's a key takeaway from this research.
Yeah.
Dueling, as strange as it seems to us today,
Right.
can teach us a lot about the importance of honor, respect,
Yeah.
and finding ways to disagree without losing sight of our shared humanity.
Well said.
Thank you.
So to wrap things up, what final thought would you leave our listeners with today?
I would say this. The next time you find yourself in a heated disagreement,
Okay.
take a moment to remember the duelists Not the romanticized swashbuckling image,
Right.
but the reality of two individuals bound by a code of conduct, risking their lives to uphold their principles,
Right.
while still recognizing the humanity of their opponent.
It's powerful.
How can we apply that kind of thinking to our own disagreements today? It's something to ponder.
That's an excellent point to end on.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the most heated debates,
Right.
there's always room for respect, for understanding, and for finding common ground.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of duels of honor.
It was my pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.